What do we have next?
So our next speaker, few up in the north have never heard of Bobby Cyrus. So whenever you see a really, really pretty classic boat, like, don't be surprised to see, Bobby, sticking his head out of the hatch with a great big grin on his face. He grew up sailing on his father's 10-meter, summers on board sailing the archipelago, winters hanging upside down on the bilge, fixing broken frames. So he's a captain, he's a boat builder, he's an historian, and when it comes to storytelling, he is Sweden's most wanted. Today he will take us to the Svanevit, I hope I pronounced it right, the yard of Plym, and that is the Plym, and I know that firsthand from Olin Stevens, regarded as the best yard in the world for at least Olin and Rod Stevens. Bobby.
The remote. Hello. Thank you. I'm very humbled and privileged to be here. I actually spoke a couple years ago, and for some reason they invited me back. I'm going to talk about August Plim, the master boat builder. When you Google the name Plim, you quickly come across interesting things, and three of them stand out from the rest. First, it's the River Plym on the south coast of England, a river that flows from the Dartmoor and ends in Plymouth. Second is the HMS Plym, the Royal Navy frigate that was used as the detonation platform for the UK's first nuclear test outside the Montebello Islands in Western Australia. And the third is, of course, the Swedish boat builder, designer, and entrepreneur, namely August Plim, and we will focus on him. He was born on the 4th of March, 1856, at Helgesgården in Essunga, outside one of Sweden's oldest towns, Skara. His parents were mother Stina Persdotter Plym and the father Sven Plym. August was their fifth child. The father, Sven Plym, was born Sven Nilsson in 1819, together with a twin sister, Maja. Due to the limited resources in his family, Sven Plym's options in life were not so bright. He could either be a farmhand or join the army. Back then, if you joined the army, you were entitled to a small cottage, a piece of land to farm, a sea uniform, a rifle, and it was all supplied by a team of local farms that had to, by law, come together for the upkeep of one soldier. The soldier did not own the cottage, the land, or the equipment, but being of such poor beginnings, this was still a lot better than being a farmhand. Also, when becoming a soldier, it was very common for them to change their surname, and usually they didn't get to choose the names themselves. It was often the commander of the regiment that chose the name. Usually the name originated from a characteristic of the person in question. For Sven Nilsson, the chosen name was not difficult to understand, Plym, which in this case meant his very thick hair. In English, it translates to plume. So Sven Nilsson, with his thick and uncontrollable hair, became Sven Plym. However, things did not go too well for Sven Plym. He and his family had to vacate the soldier's cottage when August Plym was only 3 years old and moved to another, smaller soldier's cottage of even poorer condition. After a couple of years, things turned from bad to worse for the Plym family, and when Plym was just 7 years old, his father was dismissed from the army, and they lost their home, the soldier's cottage, and their income. So the Plym family moved to Stockholm in 1863 to seek their fortune. At the time, Stockholm was in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, and there were a lot of possibilities to getting a job. So when you go through the old church records, you can see that the Plym family moved around a lot in Stockholm, and by that you realize they moved from job to job. There was no commuting to work back then. You had to live next to your job. Things did not go too well in Stockholm either for Sven Plym and his family, and by 1870 they were living as tenants on the small farm of Victorsberg on Värmdö, a parish on one of the larger islands of the Stockholm archipelago, just outside of Stockholm. August Plym had his first communion there in 1871 at 15 years of age. He had already been working for a few years. School was only mandatory for 6 years back then. August Plym worked mainly at the nearby Gustavsberg porcelain factory. He and a lot of other kids were carrying crates with porcelain from the factory to the waiting ships in the local harbor for transport to different markets. Here is August Plym, can be seen in the background of a photo of young Carl Emil Magnusson, whose father was the owner of the small farm Victorsberg, where the Plym family lived as tenants at the time. August Plym is one of many other young boys working for the porcelain factory. Then things turned even worse for the already dirt poor Plim family, and they had to move into the local poorhouse at Skeviksgård farm on Värmdö. The farm still exists. It is now a rather posh conference hotel and a restaurant, but back then it was the poorhouse. Sven Plym was registered as a pauper. That means a person without any belongings and in need of relief. But August Plym was not a pauper. He was registered as a farmhand. So he had really done something of his life back then. And in 1876, Sven Plym dies at 57 years of age. His last 2 jobs at the poorhouse had been to dig ditches and on Sundays pedal the church organ during Sunday Mass. Skeviksgård farm is situated next to the water, right by the main fairway into Stockholm. As there were almost no roads to talk about back then in a rural place like Värmdö, almost all transports was made by boat. And on a place like the Skeviksgård farm, someone had to be responsible for the farm's working boats. And in this case, it was August Plym. He had shown a talent in working with tools and boats, and also had learned to build them. And in 1880, he was, to use a modern expression, headhunted by Mr. Henning Smith to his boatyard at Kummelnäs. That's between the poorhouse and Stockholm. Mr. Henning Smith owned and operated one of the first boatyards in Sweden that built leisure boats as well as working boats. August Plym showed a great talent not only in building boats but also in leading the other boat builders in their work, and pretty soon he was made the foreman at the Kummelnäsvarvet boatyard. One boat that August Plym built at the Kummelnäsvarvet boatyard still exists and sails in Stockholm. It's the 1886 19-foot-meter-long cutter Edda. Edda was almost destroyed in 2020 when I was asked to take possession of her. Me and my family nursed her back so that at least she was floating again. And after 2 years, I sold her to her current owner, Mr. Martin Bullieu. Martin continued to restore her, and now she sails again. In 1887, August Plym left Sweden for the United States. He left Sweden through Gothenburg by ship on the SS Orlando to Hull. Then he took the train to Liverpool and then ship again across the Atlantic Ocean on the SS Bothnia. And unlike most immigrants back then, he did not enter the United States through Ellis Island in New York, but instead he went through Boston. Why Boston, you might ask? Well, by entering the US through Boston, he already had his sights set on the boatyards of New England and the possibility for him to work and develop there as a boat builder. He most likely had a letter of recommendation from the Swedish National Board of Trade that he could show to any potential employer. For three years, August Plym worked in different boatyards in New England, accumulating skills and knowledge. Then he moved back to Sweden in 1890, and he initially continued to work for Mr. Henning Smith at the Kummelnäsvarvet, again as yard foreman. There he built the cutter Alpha in 1892 to Schubert design, clearly influenced by Herreshoff's design Gloriana. He then left Smith and the Kummelnäsvarvet boatyard for a position as yard manager at the Bayards Boatworks on Rosenvik in Djurgården in Stockholm. He worked at the Bayards boatyard for the season of 1892 and 1893, and there he built the first lottery boat for the Royal Swedish Sailing Society. The boat had a hull of steel plating with a lead bulb on the keel. The boat's name was Puck, after the character in William Shakespeare's play A Midsummer's Dream. August Plym can be seen here in this photo. You could tell that Puck was a very important yacht, and the hopes were high for her to succeed, because during her first sea trials, the crew consisted of none other than His Majesty King Oscar II, the Royal Master Chief Gamekeeper Ankarkrona, Navy Commander Lindbom, and the Baron von Höpken. His Majesty the King was very pleased after the sea trial and promised to double his donation for the next year's lottery boat. August Plym's work up till then had awarded him a scholarship from the Stockholm Trade Board, and he used it to go to the United States again for the summer season of 1893. There he studied boat design and boat building techniques, and he also made a trip to the World's Fair in Chicago to see the marvels of the modern world. At the fair, there were, among everything else, replicas of Christopher Columbus ships, the Santa Maria, the Ninja, and the Pinta, and also the Norwegians had built a replica of the Gokstad Viking ship and sailed her with 12 Norwegians from Norway to Chicago. August Plym came back to Sweden after the summer of 1893, now eager to start his own boat building business. So together with sailors and businessmen Henrik Feiting and Edward Cederlund Jr., he started a company on the 20th of November 1893 named the Stockholms Båtbyggeri Aktiebolag. It's the Stockholm Boat Building Company. The initial board consisted of Henrik Feiting, Wilhelm von Roda, Henrik Granholm, and August Plym. They offered 150 shares for 100 Swedish crowns each, and August Plym bought 2 of them for himself. The newly formed company bought a small boatyard in Liljeholmen, just a few hundred meters south of the then Stockholm city limits. The boatyard had been owned and operated by 2 brothers Anderson, Fredrik and Carl, for a couple of years. They were true masters of boat building, but terrible businessmen. And in the 4 short years they owned and operated a boatyard, they had already filed for bankruptcy twice. August Plym wisely kept the 2 brothers and made Fredrik in charge of newly builds and Carl in charge of winter storage and service. Fredrik's sons and their sons and their sons and cousins also worked at the Plym yard for generations. And when the very last yacht was built at the yard in 1975, the Peter Norling designed Southern Ocean Racing Conference winner Agnes, there was an Anderson among the boat builders at the yard working on the Agnes. So it's fair to say that August Plym needed the Andersons, and the Andersons, of course, needed August Plym. On the 10th of October in 1897, August Plym married his love, Fredrika Bengtsen, and together they got 7 children, 4 sons and 3 daughters. The key to August Plym's success lay largely in the combination of the qualities he now possessed. He had learned the boat building profession from scratch and knew all the details of the profession himself. He was creative and artistic with the knowledge and courage to turn his innovative ideas into reality, both on the drawing board and in the boatyard's workshops. He was also a skilled sailor and a yachtsman, and his insights in all this led him to well thought out and practical solutions for everything on the boats he built, including rigging, mast, deck equipment, interior design, cockpit layouts, and such. He was strong-minded and a very tough businessman with a very short fuse, straightforward but with a flair for publicity, and was ruthless in his pursuit for the highest quality, strength, beauty, and performance. He was a skilled administrator and a supervisor. Not least, he had an incredible good knowledge of all the different parts of a wooden boat, and he was completely uncompromising in his demand for a good job, down to the smallest detail. Cheating or cutting corners was not tolerated at all at his yard. Any worker who did not reach his high level of quality had to leave the boatyard. August Plym was not in the least bit interested in being liked. However, he was fair, reliable, and demanded at least as much from himself as from those who worked for him. And wisely enough, he realized that his main asset in the company, well, apart from his own skill, was undoubtedly his skilled and loyal workers. He called them his greatest capital, and he treated them well in his own harsh way. At the turn of the century, about 30 workers employed at the boatyard during peak season. Working days could last from 3 in the morning till 10 in the evening. In 1898, the wages for a boat builder was 33 öre an hour. That's about 3 cents an hour. He did not allow any union activity at the boatyard, but he made sure to pay the workers a little more than the union recommendation. He also started his own health insurance fund, and he himself laid the foundation for it with 200 Swedish crowns. And the health insurance fund was in operation up until 1966. So even though he was not loved by his workers, he was very respected. And with him now, he had the knowledge on how to build more modern and better boats, particularly by using galvanized steel frames on every 3rd frame. It probably helped a lot that the Plym boatyard's next-door neighbors back then was a galvanizing company. From the US, August Plym had gotten ideas how to manufacture hollow masts and booms, and he invented his own system for drilling out masts and booms by putting the mast in a machine, kind of a large lathe, where the mast slowly rotates along its axle, and a long spoon-shaped drill slowly ate its way inside the mast. This method worked well for the shorter masts on gaff-rigged boats, but with taller Bermuda masts, when they got more common, the hollow masts were glued together. Initially, when Swedish boat builders wanted a hollow mast, they had to be imported from the United States, usually from the Boston area, and sometimes, as in the case of the fin-keel racer Ester, from one of the top spar makers at the time, the Spalding St. Lawrence Boat Company. When August Plym took over the bankrupted boatyard in Liljeholmen, not only did the 2 previous owners stay on, but also the workers and the boat builders as well. So the boatyard was fully equipped, and so August Plym got started right away. The following years, the boats that came out of August Plym's hands were always well built to top quality wood and performed very well in regattas. And in the spring of 1896, 5 boat builders started a shipyard at Baggensudden outside of Stockholm in Saltsjöbaden. It was named the Neglinge Båthem, and it was run as a cooperative business. The land that they purchased from the railroad company was not entirely ideal, as it was prone to sloshing from the Bagensfjärden nearby, especially in northeasterly winds. But no other location was available for the price that the cooperative could find to pay. The yard mainly kept boats for winter storage, and they also built a few boats of good quality at the yard. The yard's finances was never good, and the yard went through 3 different owners in 4 years before August Plym buys the boatyard in the spring of 1900. He ran the Neglinge Båthem as a service and repair yard under his yard at Liljeholmen. Today, of the boats built at the Neglinge Båthem, one remains. It's the small motorboat Dixie, now owned by the Swedish Maritime Museum. On March the 26th, 1904, a fire broke out at the Plym boatyard at Liljeholmen, and the newly built boats, the masts and other equipment became the prey of the flames. Luckily, the wind was blowing away from the boatyard, and the boats that had been stored for winter, they survived. A call for help was issued after the fire, asking for tools for the workers. The ones who did the best business after the fire was most likely the sailmakers, as they had to make new sails for all the surviving boats. After the devastating fire in 1904, the Plym boatyard moved its entire operations to Neglinge in Saltsjöbaden, and among the first works undertaken were repairs to some of the fire-damaged boats. And in the autumn of 1904, August Plym had built a modern, huge new workshop with, among other things, long skylights. The boatyard now had 3 berths next to each other, where a large number of boats could be built simultaneously. The largest yachts were built in the middle one, and the building also contained had a carpentry and mechanical workshops, a wood dryer, a huge steam generator, and a steam box for steam bending woods, and also a well-equipped forge and a foundry for keels. At the same time, the workers' housing, the so-called mahogany villas, was also built up on the ridge above the boatyard. August Plym also built a big house for him and his family just above the yard. The house still sits there today. The main workforce was still about 30 men, and in peak season there could be 20 more. August Plym already had his goal completely clear at the time, namely to acquire ownership of all the shares in the boatyard in order to be able to run the boatyard according to his own plans and ideas. So from 1911 he owned 90% of the shares, and a couple of years later 100%. The first boat to be finished in 1905 at the new yard was the Thelma, a 150 square meter. Thelma was a very fast boat and still is, to this date, the holder of the Stockholm Archipelago unofficial blue ribbon for fastest monohull from Blockhussudden to Sandhamn in the outer archipelago for 4 hours and 58 minutes. It's a distance of 38 nautical miles. Thelma still exists, but is in need of finishing the restoration that began for over 30 years ago. The Plym yard built and manufactured everything on a wooden boat apart from the sails and ropes. They made their own copper rivets from a copper wire thread. Here is the tool where you make the rivets in. This was a job for trainees and children, mostly. The yard had its own block maker. Usually the blocks were made of mahogany, and sometimes even from the hardwood paddock, with bronze sheaves and bronze roller bearings. A washer with the yard name held the axle in place. For every new build, there was also a half model made in order to check the designer's lines. The models were fitted on a wooden board, and after the boat was delivered, the model was hung on the walls of either the lofting attic or the yard office. There was no electricity at the Plym yard until the 1920s. All the machines were powered by belt drive. The lighting at the yard consisted in the early days of carbide lamps that ran on acetylene gas and part kerosene lamps, and then the master rigger had the responsibility of starting and putting out these lamps. Also, before the last worker left the yard at night, they always took an extra round to check for any lights still on, and also so there were no linseed oil-soaked rags lying about that could catch fire. Only 2 places had heating. One was the lumber kiln and the other was the yard office. And on occasion, they had a few radiators under a few of the workbenches on really cold days. The carpentry machines in the yard were powered by a large crude oil engine. And it's no exaggeration to say that August Plym brought the Stockholm Boatbuilders, the Neglingevarvet, to the country's leading boatyard, and for a period as one of the world's leading wooden boatyards. He was an expert on wood and knew everything in detail within the field of boat building. August Plym was very particular with the different woods he needed for the yard. The mahogany was bought from an importer in Stockholm. August Plym always bought logs big enough to at least get all the topside planking from one log, so there wouldn't be any difference in color in the hull. And he always kept a few extra planks from the log and marked them with the yacht's name for future eventual repairs. Some more exclusive builds had the Cuban mahogany in the top sides and Bangkok teak in the bottom and pear tree in the cabinet panels. Pine was purchased on annual purchasing trips from mostly central Sweden and sometimes from the province of Småland. Some was purchased from the north of Sweden. The pine was dried down in their own kiln to about 10% moisture, and the Swedish spruce for the masts was debarked and the tree was split lengthwise. Everything except the core was treated with linseed oil and varnish. The moisture then escaped through the core and no cracks occurred. This process took about 10 years. Sitka spruce from Alaska was also used sometimes for more exclusive masts. Oak was purchased from both Sweden, Poland, and sometimes even from the US. The Polish oak is often taller and more straight than the Swedish oak and is therefore ideal for keel planks and stems. In addition to the newly built, about 200 boats were stored for winter storage at the boatyard, and a large proportion of these boats were Plym-built boats. The workflow at the boatyard for new construction was that after the stems and keel planks rudder posts had been completed and the steel frames had been installed, the planking that were to be fitted were placed with a small gap against the underlying plank. This is the 12-meter Princess Svanevit being built. A divider with a pencil at one hand was drawn along the edge of the plank to the underlying plank, and then it was just a matter of planing to the line and fit it. The planks were then driven against each other with a special kind of steel clamp that was attached to the steel frame, and then 2 wedges were driven between the clamp and the plank. Then the planks were driven super tight against each other, and the new plank could then be riveted to the steel frame absolutely tight to the other plank. This is on the Sparkman Stevens yawl Cyrus from 1950 that the yard built when we did some repairs a couple of years ago. The work was often heavy and stressful, and it was not uncommon to stand on your knees, flat on your stomach, or on your back in the bow of a yacht. The spicy or sweet scent of mahogany and Oregon pine contrasted with standing and scraping a hull in the cold shed with poor lights in the winter. It was not until the 1950s that the workers got a canteen and a washroom. Previously, lunch had to be eaten by the boats or in the workshop. Sometimes there were measured work or project-based works, usually when scraping or longboarding boats. The compensation was then set by numbers of square meters of hull they worked on. During August Plym's time at the boatyard, primarily sailboats were built, with few exceptions. But when August Plym's son, Carl, took over as yacht manager, more motorboats were built. In early 1924, August Plym fell ill, and the doctors diagnosed him with stomach cancer. It was soon clear to everyone around him that he would not survive for much longer. Until he fell ill, he had been the same determined, strict, meticulous, strong man as he always been. Although the Plym children had noticed a bit less strict behavior, at least towards them, during his later years. If he had lived a couple of more years, he would still have been able to give a lot in his profession in regards of top-quality boat building. Perhaps it was, to some extent, a good thing that he ended at the top of his profession. The racing successes of the yachts he built probably have become fewer as younger designers such as Tore Holm, Erik Salander, Gustav Westlander, and Johan Anker, another international designer, made progress, in several cases even surpassing him on the drawing board. However, he always maintained his high-quality standards and did not let himself be enticed by the more extreme designs from other designers. The end is still the end, even for great men. He had nevertheless achieved more during his lifetime than most men of his time, especially considering his simple and poor origins. He would probably have been both honored and flattered to read what was written about him in the Royal Swedish Sailing Society's centennial anniversary book in 1930. Among other things, it said that during the time when Albert Andersson, Axel Nygren, Liljegren, and Schubert, and even August Plym himself designed boats that was built at the Plym boatyard, that time is considered to be the truly classic and most high-quality time in Swedish wooden boat building. August Plym would also most certainly have been both proud and happy that several of the yachts that he built, the oldest one being from 1886, are still sailing. And you also have to remember that August Plym was no stranger to new ideas and techniques in boat building. Remember that he learned a lot of new boat building techniques in the US. So if epoxy had existed during his time, he would certainly have used it. When August Plim realized in mid-1924 that he would not recover, he gathered his 4 sons and told them not to become boat designers and boat builders or boatyard owners. He did not see in his sons the qualities he considered necessary in his very strenuous profession, where one had to make one's mark and possess many contradictory qualities. He thought that his eldest son, Carl Plym, who was a trained shipbuilder, was too inexperienced to run a boatyard of the dignity as the Plym boatyard. August Plym wanted that the boatyard should be sold outside the family upon his death. August Plym died peacefully, surrounded by his closest family on the 23rd of September 1924, 68 years of age. But the boatyard was not sold. Instead, August Plym's widow, Fredrika Plym, inherited the boatyard, and the oldest son, Carl Plym, became the new boatyard manager at only the age of 25. When he, in 1930, drowned in a freak plane crash, the next brother, Bengt Plym, took over the management of the boatyard, and he was only 24 at the time. During World War II, he shared the task as boat manager with his younger brother, Gustav Plym. The youngest of the brother, Oskar, was not particularly involved in the management of the boatyard, although he did build himself a star boat in which he became the Swedish champion. He also developed a technique for building masts from fiberglass. It's the same technique used today when building poles for top-level pole vaulters. This is, of course, Armand Duplantis, the current world record holder from Sweden. But all this about the Plym brothers and their different lives is another story, and now my story about August Plym's life is over, and I will end with August Plym's final resting place at the Skogsö graveyard in Saltsjöbaden, only a few hundred meters from his home and where his boatyard was at. It's a family grave, and he is joined in it by his wife, Fredrik, and 2 of his sons, Carl and Bengt, and 2 of his daughters, Maiken and Annie. And the graves just above the Plym family graves are the family graves of the Anderson brothers, Fredrik Anderson's family grave and Carl Anderson's family grave. Not only were the August Plym and the Anderson brothers important for each other during their lives, but equally important for each other in the afterlife. Here I'm lighting a candle. Here the story ends. You can read the Latin script from yourselves, and I'll be waiting at the bar. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bobby.